What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Paddock, and today I'm going to show you 4 ways to make a wrong note sound right. If you enjoy my YouTube content, please click the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and hit the bell for notifications. When we start learning how to improvise, we usually do it by learning the chord tones and the scales that go along with the chord. For example, if we had a G7 chord, we know that the 7 means to lower the 7th degree, so your chord tones over a G7 chord would be G, B, D, and F. And the scale that goes along with that G7 chord would be a G Mixolydian scale or a G major scale with a flat 7, so we'd be playing from G to G with all naturals. So that gives us 7 of the 12 notes that are available to us whenever we are improvising. So does that mean that the other 5 notes are wrong? So we have the 7 notes that are in the G Mixolydian scale, and then we have G sharp, A sharp, C sharp, D sharp, and F sharp. So are all of those notes wrong notes? They can be. It all depends on how you set them up when you're playing. They could also be all correct notes. So you can actually play any note over any chord if you set them up correctly. So let's talk about how to make a wrong note sound right. For all of these examples, I'm going to be using a G7 chord. For this G7 chord, any note with a sharp or a flat on it would traditionally not be a note that you would think would fit over a G7 chord because G7 is from G to G with all naturals. However, if we use these strategies, you can make any note fit over any chord. So the first strategy is an approach note. An approach note is when you approach a chord tone by a half step below or above. So if you look in this first measure, you can see that all of the chord tones, the B, the G, the D, and the B, all have a half step below it, an approach note below it. So when you use that approach note below, all of those notes, the B flat, the F sharp, and the C sharp, they all sound correct because they belong to the chord tone, and the chord tone is such a strong note that if you have an approach note before it, it's always going to sound really good. The second measure in this lick has a bebop scale. A bebop scale is a scale that has both sevenths. So it has the minor 7th and the major 7th. You could kind of think of this F sharp as also being an approach note, but we're going to talk about how it's functioning later in this tutorial. But take a listen to the second measure. Now listen to the whole thing together. Sounds pretty good, right? Take a listen to it with the track where the backing track is playing a G7 chord. An approach note can also come from above. They don't just have to come from below. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to use another strategy for making a wrong note sound right, and that is using an enclosure. An enclosure is when you have a target note and you play the note below it, the note above it, and then you land on the target note. So below, above, land on the note. So in this example, you can see that the target note is the G half note, and I'm playing the F natural to the G sharp, landing on the G. So the enclosure is F, G sharp, G. So I'm enclosing that G with the F and the G sharp. In that example, I'm making the G sharp sound like a correct note because I am using it as an enclosure with an approach note above. So the G sharp is landing on the G. Now you can also do an enclosure where you have the note above, the note below, and the target note. So take a listen to this example. So in this example, the B is the target note, and the first enclosure note, the enclosure note above, is the C natural, and the enclosure note below, which is an approach note, which is the B flat, which traditionally doesn't fit over the G7, is leading into the B natural. Take a listen to both of these back to back. So by the way I am setting up that G sharp and B flat, I can make both of them sound like they are correct notes. Take a listen with the backing track where I'm playing over a G7 chord. If you'd like to add some structure to your practice routine, or dive deeper into improv, or even start improvisation from the very beginning, from scratch, I'd like to invite you to check out the Scott Paddock Sax School. I'll put a link in the video description below. The next strategy for making a wrong note sound right is adding in a chromatic passing tone. All that means is where you have a whole step, you can put the half step in between. So if you look at this first example, we have a whole step between the A and the G, so we're going to put that G sharp in there. So that G sharp is the passing tone in between the A and the G. Now let's do a passing tone with the B flat. So we're going to do B, B flat, A. Now let's do it with the C sharp. I threw the G sharp in there also, so we had two passing tones. And let's do it with the E flat. So you can use chromatic passing tones all over the place. So whenever you have a whole step, you can just put that half step in there. Now with all of these, one thing I should notice is all of these wrong notes that we're making sound right, we're playing them as like eighth notes. We're playing them fairly quickly. We're not landing on the notes. We're not making them a strong part of what we're playing. We're using those notes to set up something else that we're playing. If I land on the wrong note, it will sound wrong. So when I'm playing all of these wrong notes, I'm using them in a way that they belong to a note that is stronger and is going to make it sound correct. And usually it's acting as a setup note of some sort. So take a listen to all of these phrases played back to back, and you'll hear how I can add in each passing tone, and it's going to sound totally correct, and it's going to belong to the note that comes after it. Take a listen while I play it with a track that is looping over a G7 chord. And the last strategy for making a wrong note sound right is similar to the one that we just talked about, except it's a little bit more extreme. This one is playing a chromatic scale. But we're not just going to randomly play a chromatic scale. We're going to play a chromatic scale that starts on a chord tone and ends on a chord tone. So those chord tones are going to anchor in the notes in the chromatic scale. Take a listen to the first measure where I add in the C sharp. And the second measure where I add in the B flat and the G sharp. And the third measure where I add in the F sharp and the E flat. So I basically just played a chromatic scale from a high D to a middle D, and I put in all the chromatic steps in between, and I anchored the chromatic notes in between strong chord tones. Take a listen to this lick played with a backing track that is looping over a G7 chord. So you might be asking yourself, why would I want to add in the notes that don't traditionally belong over a G7 chord? Why not just play the notes and the scale that goes along with the G7 chord? You can, and it's going to sound good, and that is a great way to start improvising and get your improv chops down and learn how to improvise over chord progressions, chord symbols, and get your scales and chords down. That's an awesome way to get started, and it's a really good way to learn how to transition between chords and play over chord changes. But once you get into the intermediate level, going towards early advanced, you want to make your solos sound more interesting by adding in some things that are unexpected. And if you play notes that aren't traditionally the notes that fit over those chords, your lines are going to sound smoother and cleaner. They're going to be more interesting. You're going to be able to wind your way through the chords more, and everything is just going to sound better and more professional. So learning how to make these wrong notes fit is a really big step forward in becoming a better improviser. So I'm going to play over a G7 loop, and I'm going to start off by just playing the notes in the G7 scale, or the G Mixolydian scale. So I'm only going to play G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Take a listen. That solo sounded fine. All of the notes were correct. Everything fits. It's totally cool. Now I'm going to play another solo over the G7 chord, but this time I'm going to use the 4 strategies that we talked about today about how to make a wrong note sound right. And you're going to hear how much more my solo lines flow and how much more interesting the solo is. As you can hear, when I have all of these notes available to me and I understand how to use these strategies to make them fit, I can make my solo sound a whole lot better and way more professional. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. If you'd like to dive deeper into my saxophone world, I'd like to invite you to check out the Scott Paddock Sax School.